Hello everyone, and welcome to our monthly Hazardous Webinar series, where we take a closer look at one of our Natural Hazards Research Australia's research projects. We look at its findings, how to be translated into practice with members of the project team and the other people who use the research. My name's Dr. Brendon McAtee, and I'm one of the Node Research Managers at the Centre, and I'm based in our Perth office. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that we're all gathered from a range of different Aboriginal lands today. Today I'm on Whadjuk lands of the Noongar people, just a bit south of Perth. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands on which we live and work and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. We recognise that these lands and waters have always been places of teaching, research and learning. And again, thank you for everyone for joining us today. This webinar will be recorded and there'll be a link along with any presentation materials shared in the coming weeks following this webinar. Please let us know if you have any technical problems by adding details to the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and our team will help troubleshoot any issues as we go. Questions will be answered at the end of the formal panel presentation, so please add your questions to the Q&A function as we're going, making sure you specify who your question's for, and we'll get to them in the last 15 or so minutes of the webinar. So today's webinar will focus on the Bushfire Information Database Scoping Project, where the research team have built an understanding of how Australia will consolidate bushfire data into an effective national bushfire database. This webinar, it will delve into the research and its methodology, provide an overview of the bushfire data, and discuss how a national bushfire database could be used in practice. So we've got three panellists today. Let me introduce them now. Associate Professor Nader Naderpajouh is a head of School of Project Management in the Faculty of Engineering at the University of Sydney, where he also leads the Organising Risk and Resilience Research Group. His research focuses on understanding different forms of organising in the face of grand challenges, including climate change, inequality and biodiversity loss. In particular, he examines how temporary organising in the form of projects contributes to a sustainable, resilient and just future. This research stream explores how communities, businesses and government agencies act collectively in response to disruption. So you can see how his experience is directly related to the project that we're talking about today. Also, Dr. Raphaele Blanchi is a bushfire researcher and team leader at CSIRO with more than 20 years of experience advancing the understanding of bushfire impacts on communities, buildings and infrastructure in Australia. Her research has informed nationally adopted bushfire resilient building guidance, Australian policy and regulatory reforms, and community education programs. She leads research on bushfire adaptive homes, which is another NHRA project, and contributes to the National Bushfire Intelligence capability, while maintaining international collaborations across Europe, the Americas and Asia. Her expertise spans bushfire databases, post-fire investigations, vulnerability analysis and the development of evidence-based solutions to reduce bushfire impacts on communities and on infrastructure. And we also have David Field, more commonly known as Fieldy, around on the ground. He's been a fire behaviour analyst in the New South Wales Rural Fire Service's predictive services team for over 10 years. In the last decade, he's worked on most of the significant bush and grass fires that have occurred in New South Wales, been deployed interstate and internationally, and established RFS's upper air weather observation capability. He's also supported national research projects, supported criminal and coronial investigations, and supported the delivery of a large number of inquiry and Royal Commission recommendations. David's passionate about using research to help improve firefighting and organisational decision-making, and it's been great to have him involved with this project for that experience that you've just heard there. Outside of work, he's a keen gardener and native plant enthusiast, and is always very keen to discuss the latest Gardening Australia episode. You never know, we might get to that a bit later. Let me now hand over to Nader, Raphaele and David for their presentations. First, we'll hear from Nader, and I'd like to pass over to you.
I would like to start the presentation with reiterating the acknowledgement of the country. I am on the unceded land of the Gadigal people of Eora Nation, and I would like to extend this acknowledgement to the land for the people who are joining the online presentation. As Brendon mentioned, we have a multidisciplinary team here from University of Sydney. It's myself, Sonia Ragad. We have a team from RMIT University, Matt, Erica, Ozzy, and Nenad. We have a team from CSIRO. You will see Rafi today, but we also had Jonathan on the team. And Brendon was our node manager, and we work with RFS and specifically with David on this project. So what is the start point for this research? The national inquiry and also New South Wales independent inquiry, they have both indicated that Australia does not have a appropriate and usable national database for bushfire. So we started with the question of what data is available, what are the characteristics of these data, and how this data is organized, specifically focusing on the artifact of database as an artifact that the whole organizing of data is around that. So the research we have done is a result of a desk review of standards and catalogs, including some international comparisons of the platforms that are used across the globe. And we also did 25 semi-structured interviews with some national, state, and territory agencies based on the ethics approval that is done at the University of Sydney and then shared with the rest of the team. So I will start first with the discussion of international examples, and I'm aware that Rafi later in her presentation will go in details on that. But as you can see, there is a range of comparatives internationally for national databases that coverage from real-time historical type of data. The data type ranges from fire danger indices, vegetation, and some forecasts, and it's used for monitoring, forecasting, and also for response. Since this project was conceived, there has been also some national initiatives. For example, NBIC, AFDRS, and Geoscience Australia have also started their databases. So some of the discussions we would have, we will see that we'll shift into how effectively we move from the stage that we are in. So Rafi will go into details in this, but there are these international examples. And these examples would also use very established metadata standards. The most common one is ISO 19115, and there is also different vocabularies that are used. So we have documented these in the reports, that when the report would be out, you can see all of these syntheses of international examples, the standards they are using, and the vocabulary they are using. So what we did at the start is to set infrastructure for any national database, which includes the metadata standard and also its vocabulary, the controlled vocabulary. And we proposed as a common commonly used standard. We use ISO 19115, and DCAT would be what we are proposing for different vocabulary to make sure that everybody is aligned and use the same vocabulary for the national database. So these can be the infrastructure for going towards national database. And again, you will see some details of it will be shared later today by Rafi. But the question is, why do we need national database? And we ask this question for leveraging the resources and also negotiating the resources we need for the national database. Why this question would come up? Is it just we want to follow everyone else, or is it really benefit? And there are trade-offs that we can do for national database. But the benefits of the national database is obviously improving discoverability of the data, because we would have data which is same across different jurisdictions, overcoming a patchwork. So where there are gaps with the data, if we have a national database, there would be resources to get those data and make sure that the national coverage is satisfied. Reliability and continuity for mission critical services. So if we have a very established standard, every service will face and use the same type of data, and the standardization would be much easier. Cross-jurisdictional situational awareness. So different jurisdictions would better understand how they are responding, how each of them work, and that can instigate potential collaborations for them, improving efficiency. If data collection is at the national level, we can bring the pool of resources together, and every effort that we are going to have would be a collective effort that would increase the efficiency, supporting risk prioritization and planning, again, across the different jurisdiction. One of the important benefits that was suggested by our interviewees is meeting the inquiry expectations, because a lot of time when the inquiry or any national quest is raised, it is very difficult for different agencies to come together to respond to that. So if we have a national database, it would be much easier to support that. Building shared language and public confidence, and also advancing the interoperability and reducing duplication, which again improves our efficiency. So these are the benefits of the national database, but there are key barriers to this national database. You can see on the top right of the slides the technical and data barriers, which is, for example, the data schema that we set up, for example, the vocabulary, the standard, might drift throughout the years, and how would that result in drifting towards different direction for different jurisdiction? System incompatibility and large volume and storage limits of the data. But it's much more than just technical. There is administration and institutional level barrier, like bureaucratic complexity, intergovernmental tensions that we would have between different jurisdiction, ambiguity in the scope, which would be much more difficult across jurisdiction. Governance and legal challenges, for example, who would take the custodianship of the data and the uncertainty associated with it? What are the privacy and access constraints that we would have, again, because it would be national level? What are the legacy systems and security compliance? So we need to address these barriers before we move towards a national database that can be used across different jurisdictions. And also operational and resources. Obviously, in the agencies we face more and more resource limitations. There would be loss of operational agility if we collect more data towards a certain standard, and how can we address this in a timeliness and maintain this database at the national level. So we propose principles of any effort that goes towards the national database. Again, as I mentioned, some efforts have been established since we started the research. We call this the grounded principles. So the databases, the national databases, should be governable, very clear custodianship and accountability across different jurisdictions, should be reliable, again, across different systems that we would have in jurisdiction, and different standards and practices that we would have, should be open, promotes transparency and shared access across the different jurisdictions. You can see the tension coming here between privacy and openness and transparency. Should be usable across jurisdiction with different systems that we are having, and we can plug it into multiple systems that are working in different agencies. Should be nested, the balance between national level and local one, which I will touch on it on the last slide. Should be distributed, so custodianship should be close to the source to make sure we get also the contextual understanding that might be missed at the national level data. We should plan for long-term sustainability of such database. This is a challenge that some of the existing custodians of the databases are raising, that, for example, the funding would have a limited timeline in it. And we need to make sure that the databases are deliberate. They protect sensitive, cultural, indigenous data appropriate to the context that they are dealing with. So the outcome and benefits of having such a national database is this situational awareness, consistent national analytics that we would have, transparency of the data governance, and long-term continuity of better understanding of the actions associated with response to bushfire. Before I end, I just want to set the problem in a more simple way of what is the exact problem that we are facing on the ground of creating this national database. So at the higher level, we are talking about policies, how different jurisdictions work together, but at the ground, we have some baseline data. Examples of a baseline data are, for example, demographic data, which is shared openly, like population. There is no security issues with them. There is no need to protect any data, and that's the data that is accessible and available to everybody, very standardized across the nation, or even internationally. And then we have some specialized data on the bottom, which is the data which is only used and only useful for that specific context. We may not even want to share it. It might not be even useful if we are sharing it. So the tension is to create a balance between these two. And we basically, the national database is trying to increase the box above the baseline data. And we bring more and more of the data, for example, fire extent or fuel, into the baseline data from specialized data. That doesn't mean that we ignore the specialized data. It means that we create a broader baseline data that can help us leverage resources and be more efficient at the national level with a collective approach. I would like to finish my part of the presentation with three different findings that we had so far. One is the balance between the local context and the broad national level of relevance. We always hear that the best knowledge is what you hear, for example, in the pub from the neighbor, how the fire is moving, what are the natural characteristics. So that national database should complement, not replace the context, the local context data. So these two will work together. Again, we try to increase that baseline level to serve broader communities in a consistent way, but at the same time, we make sure that the local context is used and guide us while we are using the national database. One thing is that local level disparity should not become national level disparity. So we are talking, let's go back to the first assumption that we had at the start of a presentation. The main challenge was that we had these local data that they are inconsistent. They don't talk to each other a bit across different jurisdictions. So now we are creating a national level to address that. We should not come up with multiple national levels. So we need to make sure that there is a collective approach at the national level, and all the national level databases talk to each other, and there are consistency at the national level. And very important point is that the collective database can be a strong leverage in budget constraints area. So we talked to a lot of regions where they were facing budget constraints. They had less resources to respond, and initiatives such as national database has allowed them to leverage, ask for more resources, for more personnel, for more systems, so that they would come up to the consistent standard that we are facing at the national level. We are continuing this research, so if you are interested, please use the QR code on the slide and reach out, and we would be delighted to talk to you. With that, I would pass it to Rafi. Rafi, I can hear you.
Nader, would you like to start Rafi's slides while she gets her sound up and going, please?
Yes, definitely. So Rafi and the team at CSIRO with Jonathan, they have studied the national and international comparatives of the databases, which I touched at the start. So in her part, we wanted to provide more details onto these comparisons. So information is collected on 12 criteria: dataset names and the types, geographic coverage, description and purpose, data type and level, metadata standards and profiles. So different information that we use for categorizing the different systems that are used internationally and can be shared. And you can see that while there are some common denominator internationally, for example, ISO is used very commonly, you will see, across different systems, but there are some nuances in every country because of the legislations they would have, because of the systems they are using, and because of the different combination of jurisdictions that they are they are covering. So you can see some of these examples from the team that CSIRO that they have provided, and I touched on them, but you can see that they would provide different incident tracking, different analysis and planning and modeling purposes. It comes from NASA, GWIS, Copernicus EMS in Europe, which provides also global data. EFIS from Europe, European data, NIFC, wide land from the US, Landfire, and other wildfire data sets or bushfire data sets that are from the United States. So one example is the Copernicus European Forest Fire Information System. So in this system, regional wildfire information system focused on Europe and Mediterranean region with some products extending to MENA region. And it provides both early warning and monitoring of ongoing and past fires. So one point to note is that in these international cases, we have observed different purposes and sometimes they are extending their focus and coverage and the usage of the purpose. There is GWIS, which provides global wildfire information. I would say the equivalent of it nowadays is the Bushfire Extent that is developed at the national level in Australia. And in Australia, we have three, as I mentioned, examples of databases. NBIC is the one that is developed, is integrated bushfire intelligence, national integrated bushfire intelligence. It provides information for land use planning, land management. AFDRS is covering a lot of initiatives and real-time and seasonal data for forecasting for public safety. And Geoscience Australia also have databases for thermal anomalies and hotspots for monitoring, but also for research and understanding the context later on. So one example is National Bushfire Intelligence Capability Systems, a suite of integrated national bushfire data sets developed by CSIRO and Geoscience Australia under the NBIC program, which includes hazard components, fuse, slope. Yes, I think I can hear you.
Oh, okay. So sorry, really sorry about that. That's, this bad system. Just jump into it and finish. And thanks for doing a great job, Nader, of presenting all the information as well. Just jumping in on one of the examples of the national data sets that we look at was the National Bushfire Intelligence Capability. That's really looking at medium to long-term type of data in comparison to more real-time data sets that we look in some of the international settings and others like the AFDRS, for example. And this one combines information on terrain, fuel, vegetations as well, fire land density. But it's to support, like I mentioned, like long-term type of monitoring, risk modeling, and long-term planning and land use management, and using cloud computing and advanced fire behavioral model to generate different type of data sets that are listed here. Moving on, maybe we did a bit of a comparisons of those data sets afterwards, and finishing with that information as well, to see what we can learn from some of the international systems database as well, and what we can take that in to Australia as well, to see how we can improve some of the systems as well. So when we look at some of the international systems, such as the NASA system, the GWIS system international, the European Copernicus, and Forest Fire information systems, they provide a very large scale, and they are very integrated data sets that cover multiple countries and use also common standards as well. So they bring together information from different sources into a single platform as well. So that makes it easier to access and compare the data. So I think that would be something really important for us to take as well. So in Australia, we can see that we have high quality data sets as well that we mentioned from different places, but historically this has been managed separately by states and territory. So there is some progress as well to go toward more integrated national system that's, go across those separation and silo that can happen as well to be able to set up a national systems. Looking at also some of the comparison in terms of coverage and data availability, we have in Australia a lot of detailed information on near real-time monitoring with systems like AFDRS, also the Digital Earth Australia hotspots that provide information specifically tailored to some of the Australian conditions. But how do we can make it working strongly across border and integration with other systems as well that may use these informations as well? A few notes I wanted to mention on data types as well. So both internationally, but also in Australia, it's the data that we have looked at that's been recorded or developed into those systems and data sets are strong in environmental information, such as fire location, fire ignition, birth area, fuels, vegetation, and fire weather. So there is a key gap and limited availability in on national data sets about bushfire impact, about information on building loss as well, infrastructure damage, evacuation data, health impact, socioeconomical data, and some of the costs as well. That would be really important to capture and to integrate at a national level, because that would support some of the modeling, some of the validations, and so some of the risk analysis as well. And I've seen as well that international systems are also starting to include this type of impact and recovery data sets as well. In terms of data standards, we mentioned, and I think you touched on that as well, Nader, that the international platform use well-established standards that makes data easier to share, combine across organization as well. So we are moving to the same directions. For example, NBQ's NSLIC standards that is based as well on the ISO standard 19115 as well. So I think there is another discussion and conversations at the regional to look at how we can use those different standards, vocabularies, and dictionaries as well in a more integrated way. To finish, a few gaps I wanted to mention as well. So we still think that there is fragmentation across state and territories, that's Nader mentioned as well. We also, part of this study, like we look at those international national data sets in detail, but we also did a register, where we collect 45 data sets across Australia with some different informations as well. But when we come back to those data sets and look at the link, we've seen that some of the links are not working anymore. So there is really, I think, some problem as well with and challenges with data discoverability, accessibility, and some of the long-term maintenance that we need to address as well in the future. We also look at different agencies use different definition and data formats that we mentioned as well. It would be really useful to have a platform, a unique platform that helps with the discoverability, just as I was just saying, about the data. There is some example with Digital Atlas Australia and other different examples. So that would something I think that's the next step should consider as well. Another point I think that's important to mention is the public access to some data sets that also remain limited and inconsistent. So how can we improve that? And a greater collaborations on defining common standards, data dictionary across governments, emergency services, but also research organizations to help to set up those standards and data dictionaries. So the key message to leave you, in addition to what Nader mentions, this international and national review are mentioned, I've let us know that we have a lot of very good data, but the next step is how can we do a better integration and how this integration be done all actors, all sectors, and data users as well. Thanks, and back to you, Brendon. And sorry about the issues.
Thank you, Rafi. I'm glad we got you on board. We'll pass over to you, David, to talk about the work that's been done from that end user perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Brendon, and thanks, Rafi, and thanks for giving us that sort of path forward, Nader, and highlighting some of those good examples, Rafi, of places where different industries have sought to solve the problem. I guess what I was kind of looking at is to try and contextualize it for the audience to say, why is it such a challenge for industry? And I think the reasons that I came up with were to do with the fact that, and it may not necessarily be immediately apparent, but we're collecting this information during an emergency, and so a lot of the priorities that we have for information collection during that period is actually to collect almost all available information that we can, and essentially, from there, basically just store that information. And so a lot of the information that we collect is not necessarily incredibly accurate. Potentially, it may be unverified or things like that as well. And a lot of the time, it's really difficult to interpret that information outside of the operational context with which it was collected, particularly if it gets separated from that context or looked at in a separate light. And I think like one of the best examples of that I give to people is this idea that because we do a lot of work with researchers, and they'll often come to us and ask for that initial location that a fire started at, and often they're surprised to find that the first available information that we have about a fire is quite approximate, and usually that might be because there might have that information might have been derived from a 000 call or a smoke sighting or something like that. And so that information is just naturally imprecise. And yet we're not going to withhold that information from the community. We're going to provide it however we can. And so it's almost the first official information about a fire is not terribly accurate in terms of exactly where that fire is. And that information becomes more accurate over time. But if that information isn't, I guess, viewed in that context, it can be easily misconstrued as well. The next thing that's interesting about, I guess, our operating environment is that, we're often either participants or subject to investigations and inquiries. And so the next priority for us is really to actually, I guess, keep the data in the format that we collected it in, and make it objectively available to those, functional activities that occur after that. And so we have a strong driver of just sort of keeping information as it is and not providing any quality assurance to that data or anything other than just archiving it. So that's just an interesting philosophical aspect to how we, I guess, are receiving data and keeping it. But it's something that ends up further reinforcing this idea that, we're collecting data during an emergency. We're trying to make that collection objective. We're archiving it, but we're not really going back and, ensuring that it's attributed correctly or quality assuring it or anything like that. And then another thing I think it's important to consider from our perspective is that, there's an issue with scale too, where, in a typical fire season for New South Wales, we have around 10 to 15,000 bush and grass fires. And during a very significant bushfire season, some of those fires can be hundreds of thousands of hectares in size, and they can be managed over a period of months. And so that's an enormous amount of data that gets collected, and it's collected, under emergency conditions and not necessarily quality assured. So I think that's important that that's part of the conversation as well. Another thing that's interesting from an agency perspective is that the data gets stored in different corporate systems, and it can be quite difficult to reassemble the data, and that's not necessarily the priority from our perspective. Priority is that retention aspect as well. And so something worth considering as well. And finally, I think as you possibly heard a little bit from both Rafi and Nader's presentation is some of the benefits to addressing this issue are not directly realised by the agencies as well, and yet we will be the ones that are most likely the ones that will have to invest directly in sort of addressing this problem. And so I think that aspect to the problem is important to bring up and highlight for people as well. But certainly it's something that we understand is important and we would like to see progress as well. So that's what I had for you, Brendon. I'll throw back to you.
Thanks, David. I think there's some really interesting perspectives from the end user part in there. I think our next point now, we can start to open the Q&A function. I think there's a lot of, when I reflect on this project, I think what really stands out for me is the amount of data that is out there and held by different agencies, different institutions, the diversity of that data for the different needs that it falls. And then, as we've been talking about here, that, how do we solve that challenge of making it easily accessible, easily findable, and fit for those decision-making purposes you've been talking about, David. So I think this has been some really interesting work. So we'll be using the questions that you've placed into the Q&A function. If you'd like to put some more in, the Q&A function is open, and remember to specify who your question is for. We've got one in there at the moment which expands a little bit about what we've been touching on so far from Aurora Fu. Would a national database system like this utilise a top-down approach, taking data out of the jurisdictions and harmonising that into a consistent schema or dictionary at a national level? Or does the model propose the alteration of data pipelines at the jurisdictional agency level? If so, how do you propose to adequately and equitably resource the work required to change these data pipelines within every jurisdictional agency? And I think you might have just touched on that, David. Would you like to expand on it a little bit?
Oh, yeah, it might be one to throw to Nader. I've noticed Nader's come off chat there. But look, I guess I'm happy to give my 2 cents about it. I think certainly it goes to the last point that I just made, which is, we won't necessarily see all of the benefit immediately or directly if we're the ones that suffer the opportunity cost by having to adjust our data. So from our perspective, I think it would be more beneficial if there could be some sort of top-down approach. And certainly I think, examples where there has been success, that may more likely have been the approach, I suspect, rather than trying to achieve this kind of ground up change. But is there anything you wanted to add to that, Nader?
Definitely. I just want to first segue to what Brendon mentioned, and this was something that we heard from David and all across the country, also from other colleagues, that one of the interesting points that we raise is that in Australia, we actually have too much data. It's not that we don't have a shortage of data. So there's always a challenge of a lot of data that can be used, and there is always new systems that are coming in, new technologies for collecting data. So we don't have a shortage of data. The challenge is the consistency of the data. So the question which Aurora raised is really interesting because it's kind of showing where do we start. And we are obviously starting in the middle where we have some data existing in different jurisdictions. So I agree with David that where we are, it can be a top-down, but maybe also there will be some part of a database that the bottom-up can support. So there is no one way because there are multiple data that we are trying to combine together. And we can see, for example, which one is more beneficial, which one is more less resource intensive, easier to implement, and also more useful because we are not starting from scratch to go in a place that we don't have other data. I don't know. I think maybe to be useful, sorry, Rafi, to put you in the spot. Maybe you can share what has happened in NVIC in this aspect.
Yeah, no, thank you. No, that's good. Thanks for that as well. And I just maybe first, before maybe trying to talk about the National Bushfire Intelligence Capability NVIC, some of the project where we bringing national data sets on different informations like vegetations, weathers and future weathers as well, terrains to calculate fire line intensity on that aspect. But just to mention one example, when we talk about vegetations, like we can have data on vegetation, but they can be very, very different. So if we talk about vegetation that we want to use for fire modeling, for example, we need information that fuel load. We need vegetation that, for example, depending on the fire model that's going to be used, vegetation height density, fuel moisture, curing levels as well, and other aspects. So this fire is going to be used, this characteristic is going to be used in the fire, to run those models using vegetations and fuel classifications and mapping as well. But to understand after, how we can make this data discoverable and understand, what type of vegetation and fuel information is available, at what scale is collected as well, Is it suitable to do different type of use? Is it suitable for a fire behavior? What type of modeling it is used? Is it usable for risk assessment, or is it usable for land management or emergency planning? I think it's really important to have all of those information that are also details and explained into those data sets and systems, so people know what's the how can they use the information, what's the limit, what the scales as well, and be able to share them in a better way as well. So that's something I wanted to mention about that you talk about. But yeah, just to go back to some of the work that have been done with NBIC is trying to produce effectively a national data set. So it's this information allowed to compare things when you look at risks in different states. You have the same data that's been used to produce the informations, and that could be very useful to do some comparison between states, or used to even different programs that can use that to support some of their decision making as well. So it's really important to come up to a national data set for some aspect of the use of the information.
Looking at the list of questions that we have quite a few about what kind of data that such a database might contain. We'll address a couple of those. From Sue Ogilvie, will the dataset include characterization of the type of vegetation and flammability rating of the vegetation? At what scale would this be available? Do you want to comment on the data side, Nader?
I think the one main point, one thing to raise, and it's this, I can see this is raising also probably in other questions as well. We have not proposed any database ourselves. We have just provided what are the pathways towards a national database, how do we organize it, how do different organizations come across them. So the decisions to what include at what scale really depends on the details of this collaborative environment. What do we have and what is useful? And there's definitely no right or wrong answer. There is a lot of discussion that can happen between different jurisdictions, and they would decide again what is the minimum viable product, how they can reach to that, how they can make it probably more useful, what resources needs to be used, and how can they reach to that leverage point of a national database with the resources that is available to them, so they can decide what to include and what not to include.
Different question from Oscar M. How does the framework in development interrelate with other natural hazards and data or data systems relevant to economic development, e.g. datasets held by ABARES, ABS, and land use and condition data? You want to comment on that probably first, Nader, and then throw to the other team members?
The use of these, so that depends on the user. Then they would have some national databases for other purposes, like ABS, like for other hazards that are available. Then they can say, okay, this fire one would be another layer of the data that they can use, and then they apply it into their models, into their simulation, into different exercises that they would have with them. So there wouldn't be an established relation probably at the National Fire Database with many of these, unless there is a need for it. But usually, I think this integration can happen at the agency and user level. However, if there is a need, they can obviously connect them together as well. And this is an example that I think some of the international examples have used, for example, land use and condition data.
Rafi, David, any comments on those elements?
I think you can see some, like, if there was a bushfire, national bushfire database did exist, you could see some downstream kind of, improvements or wins for those other databases or those other analysis processes that go on outside of bushfire, I guess, as well. So I think sort of speaks to that point, which is, it's not just bushfire that this could be useful for if it was to occur.
Yeah, and I think we discussed. Sorry, I just jump in on that. But yeah, we discussed that at the start of the project as well. What is bushfire? What is not bushfire? But what's not bushfire can also benefit information on bushfire, all the information on socioeconomic, demographics, and others as well. Like I mentioned, that's not used a lot at the moment, and not recorded a lot specifically. would also benefit some of the risk analysis as well. So I think this is really important not to only focus on bushfire data, but wider data that can help us understand risk, vulnerabilities, and resilience as well of the community.
Thank you. Just a question from Ian Fitzpatrick. He notes, and this is what we've been talking about. So just to be clear, are we in a scoping phase of a national database, or is it under construction? And if so, when do you think it would be ready, available for research? So definitely, I would say, Ian, that this at the moment, this has been a scoping project to understand what it would need, what it might look like. This construction phase is, I guess, phase 2 of this kind of work that we've started thinking about. But I might throw over to Nader just for your kind of thoughts on what happens from here, Nader.
So our study was to understand how do we organize for national databases, what are the practices, what are the challenges, what are the barriers. But at the same time, there are efforts at the national level that they are developing. Again, as Rafi shared, it's NBIC, it's geoscience, it's AFDRS. So there are efforts that are happening on that, and our research would inform the practices of moving and using those national databases forward as well. But if there is an effort for broader national bushfire database, they can use the pathways that we are supporting. So this research can inform that pathway.
Question and comment from Kane Orr for all of the panel members. And he says, our number one issue in developing the National Bushfire Extent data products under NBIC is who actually owns these national database capabilities. At the moment, we have no nationally mandated owner. This flows on to a lack of direction and that consistent national push. In your international research, which type of body, if any, did you identify as those authoritative national agencies who own those mandates? For example, FEMA in the US.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. Thanks, Kane, for the questions. And yeah, and really true as well. Like it's the complexity of coming together with national data sets and having a continuity of those data sets. And I just kind of want to maybe go back to maybe the European one in this case, because that's probably the one I know the most, and the example of EFIS, which and looking at the difficulty and the challenge that they have faced through the years. So the initiatives of the EFIS in Europe have started in the 70s. And for many years, there was like some countries in Europe that wanted to have standardizations of their informations about, ignitions and burnt area as well. And it took them many years to agree all together on systems where they're collecting the same information, and this information is then put together to be able to run some statistics as well at a high, across different countries. Then what makes the difference, I think that's where very important, is the European Unions invest a lot of money into the systems through the European Forest Fire Information Systems and through different organizations like the GRC specifically that would manage, collect, and support those different systems. So there is an important aspect of having a mandate by the European Commissions to develop and maintain those systems. And they maintain it in a way now that's where they have a lot of information, not only on the burnt area, the ignition point, but other information and real-time informations as well that are useful for different purposes. And that's been this information, because there's a historical, data set that's been provided across the country, been really useful for validations, for building models, for also understanding what's the risk in Europe. It's changing as well. So I'd say having like a support from the government to be able to develop those platforms is really a key point.
Thanks, Rafi.
I hope that's answer the question, but happy to.
Another question from Antonia Settle. Can you speak a bit more about, or to some of those tensions on the social side or household perspectives? Are households concerned about their risk level being public? Nader mentioned tensions between privacy and transparency. Is this a concern amongst households as well?
We interviewed only agencies, but they have raised these issues between sharing and not sharing. For example, sometimes sharing more data would result in being accountable, while David was suggesting that on the front, the main focus and purpose is to address the challenge that we have, the fire that we have, and respond to that. And the data collection is probably the secondary responsibility of the team. So then sharing that would add a layer of how responsible are we for example, the accuracy of that data that is collected. So this is a major tension that we are continuing to study with the PhD of Ragat, which you saw her name on the first slide. That how first responders at the start would face those tensions, and how these tensions would come into the agency and then national level. So at this study we covered the national level tensions, but we are continuing this in that piece of research to bring it into the individual and organizational level.
Question from David Bowman to the research team. Did you engage with the ARDC Planet Research Data Commons who've expressed interest in national fire data?
I was present in their group meetings before the start of this project, and I believe we interviewed people both from AFAC and ARDC. So the interviews are informed from people.
Another question from Sue Ogilvie for you, David, thinking about the field perspective and user perspective. For David Field, I'm a volunteer firefighter in the Gundaroo, New South Wales Brigade. The support we get from HQ to coordinate responses and manage an incident is really commendable these days. Given that volunteer firefighters are an important beneficiary of better prevention and prediction for extreme fires, what would be the key ask from you for this database?
Look, I think we get really good support from our volunteer firefighters in the field these days. And I think the reason we're looking at this is to try and have a system at the back end that can handle all that really good information that we're being given access to. So I wouldn't necessarily ask anything more of the people in the field. I think they're doing, everything that can be asked of them, and a fantastic job. It's more about probably trying to leverage the work that they've done, in the heat of the moment better over time, is to have some sort of like ultimate database that can better inform, I guess like, organizational or state or national decisions potentially. So, yep, I don't think they can do anything more than they're doing for us at the moment. They're doing a fantastic job. So,
one last question for a quick couple of comments from one of our anonymous attendees. How open were government agencies to sharing their data? It's often hard to get state-based agencies to share data, let alone nationally or publicly.
Well, I think there is always a challenge, and I think it depends on the person who is on that organization, not only just the organization, but also how open they are, how they would see the value of this sharing of the data. But we need to be to acknowledge the challenges that they are facing as well. It's a trade-off, because they might produce more work for themselves if they're sharing more. So it's this balancing act, and I think I personally believe that the person who is in those agencies are also important. It's not even between organizations. Sometimes it might happen within an organization as well.
And I'm happy to jump in there, because my team does a lot of that sharing with researchers and things like that. And I think it's just important to understand that, because the way we collect information, we're just collecting, any and all information in an emergency. There's no process that goes through that and make sure that we haven't intermingled personal data with that in a way that we would be breaking laws by providing it to people. And secondly, we're not necessarily even resourced to be data brokers for that information. We'd probably love to be, and love to have some kind of resource that was positioned to be doing that. And I think the last thing goes back to that last comment that, or those kind of last two comments that I made, which is, if we've got resources that we are, I guess, investing into a system to make it easier to retrieve that data and then share it, that's an opportunity cost for us. That means that we're not spending that money somewhere else, basically, to improve some other aspect of our business. And so we make those decisions very carefully and in a considered way. And often, the priority is to either, improve some other aspect of something that we're doing, rather than make it easy to retrieve and share data, basically, unfortunately.
Maybe just to add on that very quickly, I think it's really important maybe to set up governance and data sharing agreements in place, So that would really help to be able to share those data in a way we understand what's the data, what's the scale, how can be used, and some other limitations as well on the use. So I think that's go back again to how in developing those accessible platforms, we also have the governance and in place to support the data sharing.
Right. Thank you very much, Rafi and team. Appreciate all your appreciated comments from the audience as well. So that's drawing this session to a close. Thank you again, Nader, Raphaele, and David, for taking the time to share this work with us and answer some questions today. Thank you to everyone who joined online and for submitting those questions to the panel. That's been really good as well. The recording of this webinar will be online in the next week or so, and you'll receive an email with the link alongside information about our upcoming hazardous webinars. For updates of everything Natural Hazards Research Australia, sign up to our newsletter and follow us on social media. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next time at future hazardous webinars.